In the slow, delicate hours before the waking of the city, the Topkapi Palace stands quiet, its silhouette nestled against the blue-gray haze of a sleepy Bosphorus. A tender mist drapes the tiled rooftops and domes in gauze-like folds, and the seagulls cry in long, sweeping arcs over the water. Within these palace walls, where time curls softly like incense smoke, a different kind of morning begins. It is not the kind of morning one finds in the bustling streets of Constantinople with vendors shouting and donkeys braying. Here the day unfolds like a silk scarf, silent, measured, scented with rosewater and old stone. Somewhere deep within the labyrinth of the palace grounds lies the inner court, and beyond that still, concealed behind high walls and discreet arches, is the harem. The word itself is often misunderstood. To many outside, it conjures images of indulgence or imprisonment, neither fully accurate. Within these walls, women live, work, love, wait, and dream. They are not all lovers of the Sultan. Some will never see him. Others are daughters, sisters, caretakers, teachers. The harem is a universe of women, a microcosm governed by subtle laws, hierarchies, and rituals, ruled ultimately by the Valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother. And among the dozens of rooms lining the inner corridors, each, cooled by stone and warmed by ornate textiles, lies a modest chamber with a narrow bed. This is where Lael sleeps, or, more accurately, stirs Lael, named for the tulip that, most Ottoman of flowers, was brought here 2 years ago. She does not remember the day in precise terms. Her arrival was a blur of foreign scents, strange tongues, and the dizzying scent of musk and cardamom. She was not born in Constantinople. Her accent hints at the Black Sea or perhaps even further. No one inquires too closely. Names are often given upon arrival, a symbolic rebirth. And so she became Lael. Her chamber is small but richly adorned in its own quiet way. The rug beneath her bed is hand-woven, perhaps once used in a vizier's study. The brass mirror on the wall has a small crack in its corner, but its frame is delicately etched with pomegranates and vines. On a low wooden shelf rests a copy of Hafiz's poetry, its pages softened by repeated reading. Outside her window, hidden behind intricate latticework, the sky begins to shift. The stars fade one by one as the dome of dawn stretches overhead. It is a quiet light, not yet gold but more blue than black. A soft sigh of illumination. Then comes the knock. It is not a harsh sound, but deliberate. Halid, the elder concubine, in charge of rousing the others for morning ritual, does not linger. Her knock is followed by a pause, then silence. That is enough. In the harem, everything operates on rhythm, not volume. Lael rises. Her feet touch the rug, cool to the skin. Her nightrobe slips from her shoulders as she gathers her garments for washing. She moves through the corridor, her steps silent, echoing only slightly in the domed hallway. Other girls join her, some rubbing sleep from their eyes, others already alert, humming low tunes under their breath. The washing chamber is warm with steam. Lamps flicker against marbled walls, and the scent of lemon soap mingles with rose oil. One girl ladles water from a copper basin, another scrubs her arms with a coarse cloth. They do not speak much, not out of secrecy, but reverence. This hour belongs to stillness. After ablutions, prayers, Lael returns to her room, where a small rug faces west toward Mecca. Her prayer is quiet, internal. She speaks the words not from memory alone, but with breath softened by longing, by uncertainty, and by rhythm. Here in the harem, faith is personal. Some girls pray with fervor, others with detachment. No one watches too closely. She wraps a shawl around her shoulders and sits by the window. Through the latticework, she sees the courtyard bathed in that peculiar hue that only appears just before sunrise. The trees sway lightly. A cat walks along the edge of the wall. Somewhere below, a eunuch whispers instructions to a serving girl who carries a tray of bread and dates. This, to Lael, is the hour of ownership. Before the guards patrol the outer grounds, before officials clatter in with scrolls and petitions, before the Sultan's name is uttered aloud, this hour belongs to the women, to the stillness, to the dreams held onto from sleep. She thinks of the other concubines, their stories tucked behind veils. She knows only fragments. One girl once lived in Cairo, the daughter of a merchant. Another played the lute so beautifully the Valide Sultan asked her to perform each new moon. Some, like her, are still waiting to find their place, to be noticed or not. The Sultan. She has never seen him clearly. Once she glimpsed his silhouette through a mashrabia screen. Another time, she heard his voice echo in the courtyard. Rich, deep, confident. He is a presence more than a person. Like the moon, always somewhere above. Unreachable but felt. The harem does not revolve around him as much as outsiders believe. It revolves around the rhythms of its women. Around gossip shared over embroidery. Around the click of calligraphy pens. Around lessons in Persian poetry and arithmetic. As the sky brightens to amber and the call to prayer drifts over the domes, breakfast begins. Trays are brought in. Small loaves of bread, clotted cream, olives, pomegranate seeds arranged in little bowls. There is no rush. Eating here is part of the ritual of the morning. Lael dips her bread into honey and watches a bird land on the sill outside. Its wings are wet. Perhaps it has flown over the Bosphorus already. She wonders what it saw. She wonders what she will see today. In this palace of slow beginnings where light touches tile and silence hums like music, another day has begun. And Lael, a tulip not yet in bloom, is quietly, patiently, unfolding. The first true sound that punctuates the softness of morning in the harem is not the call of prayer, nor the rustle of slippers on the mosaic floors. It is the whispered slide of a silk curtain being drawn aside, followed by the faint scent of rose attar, a fragrance that never announces itself but rather unfurls into the room like a memory. Lael, seated cross-legged before her modest breakfast tray, barely glances up when the rustling steps approach. She already knows who it is. Only one person in the harem carries herself like perfume and shadow at once. Bashnedim Esma, chief attendant of silks, keeper of order, and one of the most enigmatic women in the Sultan's inner court. Esma does not knock. She never does. Her arrival is ritual, not request. Clad in layered robes the color of pomegranate rind and twilight, Esma is a woman of precise lines and muted authority. Her hair, always coiled tightly beneath a net of golden thread, frames a face unreadable in both youth and age. Her eyes, dark as dried figs, sweep across the room. "Rise, tulip," she says, her voice the sound of cool water poured from a copper. Lael obeys at once, brushing imaginary crumbs from her lap. "Good morning, Lady Esma." The chief attendant gives a nod, not of kindness nor coldness, but as one might grant to a promising instrument not yet tuned. This is the hour when selection begins. Not selection for the Sultan's pleasure, though that happens in more veiled corridors, but selection for the day's tasks. The harem, after all, is not idle. It is a machine of women stitched together by protocol and whisper. And each morning, Esma walks its heart, deciding who will embroider the Sultan's robes, who will attend the royal baths, who will serve the Valide Sultan, and who shall be sent to learn music or poetry or the refined art of listening without speaking. "You will join the needlework circle today," Esma says, her fingers briefly brushing a scroll of assignments. "Matron Aishi will watch your stitches." Lael bows, concealing the flutter in her chest. Needlework is no small appointment. It is where voices move gently, where alliances are woven between threads, and where rivalries are measured in the quality of a lotus petal sewn onto velvet. As Esma moves on, her departure no louder than her arrival, Lael exhales slowly. Around, her other concubines glance up from their trays. A few smile, some do not. The game of noticing and being noticed has begun, and though no one speaks of it aloud, the day has turned its first page. The needlework chamber is sunlit and hushed. Arched windows open onto a hidden garden, where magnolia trees drop their heavy blooms into marble basins. On plush cushions arranged in a loose circle, 8 young women sit with spools, silks, and small copper scissors shaped like birds. Matron Aishi, squat and soft-spoken but with eyes that miss nothing, oversees them from beneath a headdress patterned with tulip embroidery, a mark of her seniority. Her hands are rarely still, forever knotting something invisible between her fingers. Lael enters with quiet deference, her frame light as a reed. She is directed to sit beside a girl named Harem, not the famed one of history, but a spirited Georgian girl known for her laughter that bubbles too freely and a needle that moves like a hummingbird. "You're new to this room," Harem says under her breath, offering Lael a thread dyed the color of crushed apricot. "Don't worry, AC only bites if you stitch over her patterns." Lael smiles faintly, grateful for the warmth, however tentative. "I've done some work in the mending chamber," she murmurs. "Mending is for ghosts. Here we create what hasn't yet existed." Harem grins and returns to her task, her fingers already coaxing a peacock's feather out of velvet. The hours drift, not with haste, but with the unhurried elegance of calligraphy. The conversation is low and winding. Talk of the Valid Sultan's latest jewelry, the rumored gifts arriving from Venice, the flute teacher with eyes like polished amber. No topic is too trivial, and every word is coded in caution. In the harem, even laughter can be overheard by the wrong ears. At one point, Lael notices a girl at the far end of the circle, slender, motionless, her veil tighter than the rest. She does not sew. Instead, she observes. Her name, whispered, once in the corridor, is Mihri, a favorite of the Sultan's brother, they say. A woman to whom silence is armor and whose patterns are so flawless they seem unreal. "She won't speak to you," Harem notes, catching Lal's gaze. "Not until you've proven your thread can whisper as well as your mouth." That sentence lingers with Lael long after the session ends. After the midday meal, a slow affair of honeyed carrots, rice cooked with saffron, and thick yogurt with mint, Lael returns to her chamber. The needlework has left her fingers pricked, but her heart strangely soothed. She thinks of Esma again, and the quiet power she wields without so much as a raised voice. Of Aishi, whose authority lies not in volume but in precision, of Harem's kindness and Miri's distance, and of herself, an unnamed tulip trying to bloom in a garden thick with roses. This world is not cruel, not openly, but it is layered, like baklava, sweet on the surface, tightly packed within, and always at risk of crumbling under unseen pressure. Outside, the breeze shifts. A call to prayer echoes from a distant minaret, drawing shadows across the patterned floors. Somewhere nearby, a lute begins its tune, and Lael, reclining on a cushion, closes her eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to listen, to the threads being pulled, not in fabric, but in fate. In the late afternoon, when the sun begins to melt gently into the sea and the shadows within Topkapi Palace stretch their limbs, the summons arrives like a silk thread tied to a secret. Lael is called to the royal hammam. It is not a punishment, nor is it a reward. It is simply part of the rhythm, an invitation into one of the palace's oldest rituals, where soap, skin, and story blend beneath domed ceilings and echoing laughter. The hammam lies deep within the harem compound, past carved doors and corridors, painted with blue tiles where no man dares to tread. Its entrance is framed by cypress wood, worn smooth by centuries of steam and steps. Inside, the heat coils like a living thing, tender and omnipresent, wrapping the body before water even touches the skin. Lael enters quietly, her feet bare, her robe loose. Around her, concubines and attendants already fill the marble chamber like petals scattered in a warm bowl. Steam rises in ghostly swirls from stone basins, catching in the golden light that filters through high lattice windows shaped like stars. There are 3 rooms: the outer chamber for undressing and resting, the intermediate warm room, and the hot room, the Gobek Tasha, the heart of the hammam, where women gather on the great central slab of heated marble. Lael undresses behind a modest screen, placing her garments into a wicker basket handled by an older attendant with skin like parchment and eyes like candlelight. She is handed a pestamol, thin cotton cloth striped in faded red and cream, and instructed with a nod to proceed. Inside the Gobek Tasha, the air hums. The central slab is already occupied by a dozen figures, reclining like sleepy nymphs, some chatting, others dozing in the embrace of warmth. Water runs continuously from copper faucets, splashing into shallow basins, carrying with it the melody of unspoken words. Lael approaches shyly. Harem is already there, reclining like a painting half-finished. She spots Lael and lifts a hand lazily. "You're late," she teases, her voice slow with heat. "I didn't know I was expected," Layla replies, lowering herself cautiously onto the marble. "You're always expected. The hammam sees everything. You may as well begin letting it see you." As Lael lies back, the heat seeps into her bones, soothing the aches of the day's labor. Her eyes trace the dome above, a geometric miracle of Ottoman design, each stone whispering of the centuries it has seen. The scent of orange, blossom oil and soap lingers in the air, mingling with salt and lemon and laughter. An older woman with arms strong as rope approaches. She is a telak, a professional bath attendant, and she nods once at Lael. "First time?" Lael nods. "You will be soft as butter when I'm done." What follows is not painful, though it borders on intensity. The scrubbing is firm, rhythmic, almost ritualistic. Lael's skin is coaxed into softness she has never felt before, as dead layers are swept away and replaced with warmth. Then the rinsing, bucket after bucket of hot water poured slowly over her, as if she were a statue being brought to life. Nearby, two women whisper beneath the steam. Their words carry like birdsong, quick, sharp, full of meaning. She was seen leaving Esma's quarters again. Twice this week, what could she want? Her sister's position, no doubt, or worse, an eye on the Sultan's page. Lael listens without listening. This is the hammam's second purpose. It is a temple of gossip where secrets are steamed and softened before being served to the palace corridors. Suddenly, laughter erupts from the far end of the slab. A game of guessing which eunuch had the softest voice or which chambermaid was most likely to spill her tray during supper. The intimacy here is not entirely warm. There is heat, yes, but also danger. Every word, every glance, is an embroidery with invisible thread. Mihri is here too. Lele notices her near the domed fountain, her back straight even as steam coils around her. She is being massaged by a silent telek, but her eyes are open, watching. Always watching, never laughing. She never relaxes, Harem murmurs, following Lael's gaze. Even when she bathes with intention. "What kind of intention?" Lael asks. Harem shrugs. "The kind that keeps you from drowning, or from being pushed in." As the bath ends, the women are rubbed with oils, almond, rose, clove, and wrapped in dry pestimols. Some leave in pairs, arm in arm, others alone. Lael lingers a little, not yet ready to return to her room, her body too light, her mind too full. Before she leaves, she turns once more to look at the dome above her. It seems taller now, grander, as if it too had observed her, weighed her place among the others. And perhaps it had, because in the harem nothing goes unseen, not the way you pour water, nor the silence you keep. As she steps back into her robe and ties the sash, Lael feels different. Not entirely changed, but less new. She has passed through one of the harem's quiet rites and come out cleaner, not just in body, but in understanding. The palace is many things, but above all, it is a world of women. And in that world, the bathhouse is the beating heart, where skin is scrubbed, stories are whispered, and every drop of water remembers the women who came before. Evening at Topkapi does not fall so much as it reclines, slowly, languidly, like a dancer folding into the final pose of her performance. The sky, once bright with imperial blue, turns into amber and then into the deep purple of velvet, brushed gently by the call to prayer echoing from minarets. In the harem, oil lamps are lit one by one, casting golden halos on tilework older than most of its inhabitants. Lael is braiding her still damp hair, when another knock comes to her door. It is not the light tap of Halid, nor the rustle of Harem's teasing visits. It is the soft yet exacting knock of Esma, the Bash Nadim. Lael opens the door at once and bows slightly. The Valide Sultan requires the small embroidery chest from the needle hall. Esma says without entering, "Deliver it. Directly." She pauses just long enough to let the weight of that final word sink in. Then she glides away. Lael's breath stills. Directly is a rare instruction. Most messages, objects, or even questions for the Valide Sultan pass through layers of intermediaries. Attendants, messengers, older concubines who serve as buffers between ambition and danger. To be summoned into the orbit of the Valide herself, even for something as benign as an embroidery chest, is a moment of quiet gravity. She walks swiftly, but not too swiftly, through the corridors. The chest is light, carved from cherry wood, and inlaid with mother-of-pearl tulips. Inside are spools of dyed silk, silver-threaded needles, and patterns drawn in faded ink. Carrying it feels oddly intimate, like holding a slice of the palace's breath. The Valide Sultan's wing lies, deeper within the harem, beyond a series of tall doors guarded not by force but by silence. Here servants do not whisper. They barely breathe. The scent changes too. Less rose, more sandalwood, layered with the must of old velvet and parchment. A senior attendant, dressed in gray, receives Lael without speaking and motions her forward, into an antechamber lit by a brass lantern. Lael waits, the chest cradled in her arms. Minutes pass. Or hours. It is hard to tell, for time slows in proximity to power. At last, she is ushered in. The chamber is large but dim. Curtains of deep plum hang like shadows around the walls. At its center, seated not on a throne but on a low divan cushioned in emerald and gold, is the Valide Sultan. She is old, but not frail. Her hands, folded on her lap, are spotted with age, but steady. Her posture is straight, her expression composed, her eyes, two dark stones set beneath arched brows, are sharper than any blade in the Sultan's arsenal. Her robe is simple but rich, the embroidery on her cuffs finer than any Lael has seen. She wears no crown, yet her presence fills the room like incense. "You are the tulip girl," she says, her voice soft, but not gentle. "Yes, High Mother," Lael replies, bowing deeply, placing the embroidery chest before her. The Valide studies her. Not the chest. Her. "I remember when you arrived. 2 springs ago. You cried as they washed your hair." Lael freezes. She had thought herself invisible that day, swallowed among the arrivals, girls from Circassia, Hungary, the coast of the Black Sea. How had the Valide known? "I was not watching you," the old woman says as if reading her thought. "But I watch everything." She gestures for the chest. An attendant picks it up and places it at her side. "My eyesight is no longer what it was," the Valide says, fingers trailing over the cherry wood. "But my memory remains sharp. I know every girl in this palace, their origins, their ambitions, their weaknesses." Lael says nothing. Silence in such a moment is both armor and offering. "I have no use for flatterers," the Valide continues, lifting the lid of the chest. "Nor do I favor those who seek the Sultan's attention too eagerly, but I watch for the ones who listen." A long pause. Then, "You listen well." Lael feels something unspoken pass between them, like the soft click of a lock turning. "You will report to my senior needlewoman tomorrow. You will learn to stitch not just for beauty but for message. Patterns speak, child. You must learn what they say." "Yes, High Mother," Lael says, her heart thudding beneath her ribs. The Valide waves a hand and Lael is dismissed. She backs out carefully, head bowed, until she is once again in the corridor, the heavy silence rushing back around her like water. That night, as she lies in her narrow bed, the air outside sweet with jasmine and faint wood smoke, Lael stares at the lattice above her bed. She had not been given a gift nor a reward. No one had praised her stitches or declared her beautiful. Yet something had changed. A thread had been tied to her, thin and invisible, but unbreakable. The Valide Sultan had spoken to her, not as a favorite, not as a daughter, but as a possible piece on the vast, silent chessboard that lay beneath the daily rhythms of the harem. And Lael, now more than ever, knew she would not be content with blending in forever. The morning after her audience with the Valide Sultan, Lael awoke before the first light crept across the tiles of her chamber. She lay still for a moment, her breath shallow, her thoughts still wrapped in plum-colored curtains and the scent of sandalwood. Today she would report to the Valide's senior needlewoman. It was not the most glamorous of postings. There were no lavish banquets or dances to prepare for, no opportunity to catch the Sultan's gaze. But Lael sensed, in the quiet corners of her awareness, that this assignment held something rarer. Access, not to power itself, but to the threads that tied it all together. She dressed simply, as instructed, and followed a eunuch through a narrow corridor that branched off from the main embroidery rooms. These halls were quieter, older. The walls were less decorative, more functional. The floors muffled even her bare footsteps. At the end of the hallway was a plain wooden door, slightly warped by time. The eunuch knocked twice, then stepped aside. The door opened. The woman standing within was tall, cloaked in shadows and cloth. Her name was Rumeysa Hanum, though few said it aloud. Her robes were the soft green of unripe olives, her eyes a startling pale gray. She had once, rumor claimed, stitched the Sultan's coronation robe. She was not a servant of fashion. She was a scholar of symbols. "You're the tulip girl," Rumeysa said, her voice deep and level. Lael bowed. "Yes, Hanum. Have you ever stitched a secret?" Lael blinked. "I don't think so." "Then you've stitched nothing." She stepped aside, letting Lael enter. The chamber was unlike the others in the harem. It was not filled with chatter or perfume, but with silence and cloth. Rolls of silk, wool, cotton, and brocade lined the walls in neat arrangements. A large work table sat at the center, cluttered with threads, chalk, small silver scissors, and stencils shaped like birds, suns, tulips, and more. Above it all hung a tapestry, unfinished, its design indecipherable at first glance. It shimmered in blues and burnt gold, threaded with swirls and shapes that seemed to shift as the eye tried to follow them. "Sit," Rumeysa said, gesturing to a low stool, "and watch." For the next hour, Lael did exactly that. She watched, as Rumeysa worked, not quickly, not slowly, but with a precision that felt almost holy. Her needle moved like a pen, her hand steady, her focus absolute. With each stitch, a form emerged. First a cloud, then a crane, then a pattern of overlapping waves. The colors were subtle, chosen not for beauty alone, but for tone, for history, for message. "Do you know what this is?" Rumeysa asked, not looking up. Lael leaned closer. "A heron?" "Wrong. It's the bird of return, the one the Sultan's grandfather dreamed of when he conquered the Black Sea coast. It means a wish for enduring cycles. It is used only in robes for mourning or legacy." Lael nodded, feeling the weight behind the design. Rumeysa continued. "In the harem, words are not always safe, so we use other means. A pattern of tulips may say innocence, but a tulip folded into a teardrop says a favor owed. Blue beside silver means loyalty through sorrow. Red on red says vengeance remembered." She reached for a skein of thread, dyed with crushed cochineal beetles. Only fools think embroidery is for beauty. In this palace, it is language. That afternoon, Lael was given her first test, not to sew, but to interpret. Rumeysa handed her a scrap of silk. Upon it, a modest design. A cypress tree wrapped by two cranes, their wings outstretched, beaks nearly touching. "What does it say?" Rumeysa asked. Lael frowned. The cypress, she remembered from her brief studies, was often a symbol of mourning or patience. Cranes were loyalty, perhaps devotion. Together? A long wait, Lael guessed hesitantly. Waiting for a reunion? Rumesa's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Close. It means she waits with dignity for what will never come. Lael looked again. This time she saw the sadness in the crane's distance, the bowed top of the tree. It was not just art. It was resignation stitched into cloth. Where was it sent? Lael asked, her voice barely above a whisper. To the Sultan's third, concubine, after she lost her child. The silence that followed was not empty. It was reverent. In the following days, Lael learned more than she had in years, not through books but through thread. She learned that green was sacred and should never be used on clothing intended for grief. That peonies meant secret joy, while hyacinths signaled forgiveness. She studied Ottoman motifs like script, understanding that a star turned just slightly could signal suspicion, and that a fish leaping east meant renewal, but west meant ambition thwarted. She discovered that each robe sent to the Sultan carried not just the handiwork of women's fingers, but their feelings, fear, favor, longing, warnings, and that the Valida Sultan, above all, read those robes like letters. Rumesa never praised her, but neither did she send her away. You see, the older woman said one evening as they folded a shawl lined with gold-threaded pomegranates. The harem is a garden, yes, but not all flowers here bloom for beauty. Some have thorns for roots and some learn to speak through their petals. Lael, holding a spool of thread dyed with indigo and fig, nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand. That night, in her chamber, Lael found herself staring at the simple pattern on her own pillowcase. Tulips again. But this time she wondered, who had chosen them? Who had stitched them? And what had they meant to say? There are many types of silence in the harem. There is the silence of waiting, the long pause before a name is called, a door opens, or a verdict is spoken. There is the silence of obedience, the careful hush that settles in a room when a higher-ranking woman enters or when the Valid Sultan walks past with her eyes fixed on some invisible horizon. And then there is another silence, rarer, deeper. It is not empty, but full. It does not demand stillness, but invites attention. It is the kind of silence that makes you notice the sound of your own heartbeat, or the creak of a cushion beneath someone else's weight. A silence that listens back. Lael encountered this kind of silence for the first time on a soft, warm evening, when the palace gardens breathed out their last heat of the day and the sky turned the color of diluted wine. She had been sent on a small errand. Simple, so simple it hardly seemed. Worth assigning. A sachet of lavender oil to be delivered to one of the older concubines recovering from illness. The woman, named Daria Hanum, was not well known. She had once been close to the Sultan's uncle, perhaps, or maybe only the Valide's cousin. Her chamber lay in a quiet wing, rarely visited, near the rooms where women went once they had been. Overlooked. Lael expected nothing more than to drop off the oil, bow politely, and return to her embroidery. But when she entered the chamber, after a gentle knock and the quiet creak of the door, she found Daria Hanum sitting alone, upright, on a cushion, her hands folded in her lap. The windows were open, letting in the dusk. No music played, no incense burned. The walls were bare save for one small panel of Iznik tiles depicting a single almond tree. The air smelled faintly of cardamom and old paper. Daria did not speak. She looked at Lael, not unkindly, just steadily. "I brought the oil, Hanum," Lael said quietly, setting it down on a tray beside a cup of untouched tea. Still no answer, but the woman's eyes softened slightly, as if nodding without moving. Lael hesitated. The silence felt alive. She did not know why she did it, perhaps out of instinct or a deeper courtesy, but she sat. Not too close, just on the edge of a neighboring cushion. She kept her hands in her lap, her posture open. Minutes passed, perhaps 10, perhaps 20. Neither spoke. Outside, a bird called once and was answered. The sound of a distant splash, a fish or someone rinsing water from a basin. The rustle of a fig leaf against the lattice. And still, neither moved. Lael's mind, so often filled with calculations, where to walk, what to say, how to stitch a thought without revealing it, began to slow. Her breath deepened. She began to notice her own heartbeat, not as panic but as presence. And then, without warning, Darya Hanum reached forward and touched the edge of Lael's sleeve. Just lightly. A graze, no more. Her fingers were cool, her skin thin as rice, paper. She did not speak. But she held Lael's gaze. And in that moment, Lael felt something shift. She did not know what had been said between them. But something had been. Something wordless. Timeless. She had been seen. Not as a girl seeking status nor a novice among whispers, but as a person. Whole. Silent. Present. When she finally rose, Lael bowed again. Deeper than before. She left the room more slowly than she had entered. The corridor outside felt louder. Then she remembered. The footsteps of a eunuch passing. The clatter of a dish in a distant kitchen. The world, it seemed, had begun again. But inside her, the quiet lingered. Later that night, in her own chamber, Lael could not sleep. Not from restlessness, but from fullness. She had experienced something for which she had no name. She thought of the Valid Sultan, of Rumesa's cryptic lessons, of the language of embroidery. She thought of Harem's teasing, of Miri's gaze like a veil, and she thought, above, all of silence, of how little was said in the harem and how much was understood. The next morning, she returned to her stitching with a new awareness. She no longer pulled thread the same way. Now each tug, each loop, carried not just color or pattern, but pause, space, the unsaid. When Rumesa asked her what she had learned from the previous day's task, Lael simply said, "To listen." And Rumesa, without looking up, replied, "Then you are finally beginning." In the harem, there is power in beauty and power in presence. But the greatest power, perhaps, lies in the spaces between glances, between stitches, between words. Lael was learning to live in those spaces, to breathe them, to let them speak for her. It was not the most visible path. It was not loud, but it was hers. The order came wrapped in simplicity, to the mirror room. It was whispered into Lael's ear by a quiet eunuch with almond eyes and hands that never stopped fidgeting. He offered no scroll, no explanation, only the destination, as if it explained itself. And perhaps within the harem it did. The mirror room was a place rarely spoken of aloud, though every girl knew it by name. It sat tucked behind a narrow passage beyond the baths, through an arched door so polished it reflected the lantern light like the surface of still water. Few visited it often. Even fewer returned from it unchanged. Lael had never been summoned there before. She had heard stories of girls who entered laughing and emerged quieter, more graceful, and somehow more aware of the weight of their beauty. She walked the corridor alone, her footsteps slow, steady. She wore a plain robe of ivory muslin, her hair still braided simply as it always was for mourning. But as she neared the door, she felt each stitch of her clothing, each strand of hair, as if they now mattered in ways she didn't fully understand. The door creaked softly as it opened. Inside, the room shimmered. It was not large, but it felt vast. Every surface, walls, pillars, the very ceiling was covered in mirrors. Some were full-length and clear, others cracked at the corners, slightly warped. They reflected not only the body, but the gaze, the pause, the self within the self. The floor was pale marble, veined with delicate gold. In one corner stood a stool beside a table strewn with cosmetics, coal pots, tiny brushes, and crushed pigments, in mother-of-pearl bowls. Another corner held silks draped over a low bench, glowing with the hues of pomegranates, lapis, and saffron. At the center of the room stood a woman in a robe of deep copper, embroidered with flames so fine they seemed to flicker. She was neither young nor old, and her expression was unreadable, like the surface of the mirrors she stood among. "You're Lael," she said without question. "Yes." The woman studied her, not rudely but thoroughly. "You've been requested to train here for 1 week, 1 hour each evening. The Valide wishes it." Lael blinked. "To train in what?" "In what cannot be taught." The woman gestured to the mirror beside her. "Begin by standing there." Lael moved into place, unsure of what to expect. She faced her own reflection, familiar yet strange here. The glass made her appear taller, paler, more exposed. She saw the faint shadow under her eyes from nights of stitching, the soft curve of her cheek, the way her collarbone peeked beneath muslin. "Hold still," the instructor said, and so she did. The first few moments passed awkwardly. Lael resisted the urge to shift her weight or smooth her robe. But soon, the silence of the room, the kind that mirrors amplify, wrapped around her. She began to notice things she never had: the slight droop of her left shoulder, the way her breath pulled her chest upward unevenly, how her mouth always hovered between a smile and a question. "Do you see?" the woman asked. "I think so. You carry your doubt in your left side, your pride in your right. You lead with your eyes, but your hands follow too slowly. You must learn to enter a room as one single thread." Lael tried not to frown. "Again," the woman said. "Walk across the room, turn, sit, without thought but with presence." The training was not physical. It was attunement. Every movement had to feel deliberate yet unforced. Lael was told to blink slower, to tilt her chin, not in defiance but in grace. She was taught where to rest her gaze, how to lower her eyes without seeming timid, how to speak without speaking. Over the next days, she returned again and again. Each evening, the mirror room met her with new challenges. One day, she practiced draping a shawl. The next, choosing colors that whispered her intentions. One evening, she was taught how to listen to the sound of her own footsteps. Another, how to receive a compliment without giving one in return. But more than anything, she observed the way others arrived. For Lael was not alone. Girls came in pairs in silence, rarely speaking to one another. Some stared at themselves with hunger, others with disdain. Some tried to copy what they thought the Sultan might like: fluttering lashes, tilted necks, soft gasps. But the instructor, always calm, always watching, corrected them gently. No man falls in love with a mask he can see through, and so they learned to make masks from authenticity. By the 6th day, Lael no longer looked away when facing her reflection. She had not grown more beautiful, but she had grown clearer. She saw herself not as others did, nor as she had feared, but as someone shaped by choices, by silence, by detail. "You are almost ready," the instructor said, smoothing a strand of hair behind Lael's ear. "You are not the brightest star, but stars are not meant to burn. They are meant to be seen and remembered." Lael bowed her head, unsure if it was praise or a warning. As she left the mirror room that evening, the corridor outside felt narrow, shadowed, almost too small for her. Not because she had grown, but because she had become more. And in a palace built on appearances, knowing how to be seen, without asking to be, was a form of survival. In the harem, celebration rarely roars. There are no fanfares, no trumpets, no great pronouncements. Festivity slips in softly, like scent from a jasmine bloom. It does not announce itself. It arrives through whispers and soft silks, through a tray of sweets passed at an unusual hour, or the appearance of brighter robes in the laundry. And so when Khalid whispered to Lael that there would be a gathering that evening, a private feast among the concubines, Lael knew to speak of it, to no one else. These events were not forbidden, but they were delicate, allowed, provided they stayed within their shadows. The gathering was to be held in the Garden of the Blue Fig, a courtyard hidden deep within the harem's winding paths, walled in by trellises of star jasmine and grapevine, where the fig trees, limbs bowed low, its fruit heavy even in the moonlight. Lael arrived at twilight. The garden had been prepared not with grandeur, but with care. Cushions were laid out in a circle. Lamps hung from the lattice walls like floating stars. A small fountain gurgled at the center, surrounded by dishes of preserved lemons, sweet cheese wrapped in grape leaves, rice perfumed with saffron, and dates stuffed with almond paste and dusted in rose sugar. No attendants, no eunuchs, only women. Not all the concubines came. Those closest to the Valid Sultan remained at a distance, as did those recently favored by the Sultan, perhaps instructed to avoid frivolity. But a great many others were there, needleworkers, dancers, singers, and quiet girls who moved like water between tasks and gossip. Lael found herself seated beside Harem, whose eyes glittered with mischief, and across from a girl named Rukiye, who rarely spoke but had a reputation for painting stories onto parchment, with nothing but dye and silence. The meal began not with toasts or words, but with the passing of bread. One woman broke a flatbread in half, handed it to the next, who tore a piece and passed it on. It was a quiet ritual, not religious, not political, just bonding. A reminder that within the veils and ceremonies these were still people, still women, who hungered, who laughed, who remembered the taste. Of home conversation flowed gently, not loudly, never boldly. Instead, words curled softly into the evening air, a memory of snow on a Georgian hill, the sweetness of Turkish delight soaked in clove water, the embarrassing squeak of a sandal during morning prayer. But beneath the lightness, Lael could feel the pulse of something older, something deeper. There were glances that lingered too long, questions asked with false innocence, compliments that carried weight like silk-threaded daggers. "You've grown quiet, Tulip," Harem said, smiling over a bite of quince jam. "Too much embroidery dulls the tongue, or sharpens the eyes," Lael replied. Rukia, across from them, looked up at that. She did not smile, but she nodded. Approval, perhaps, or acknowledgement. Then came the dancing, not formal, not rehearsed. Just two girls rising to their feet, one beating a small hand drum, the other letting her hips follow the rhythm. No stage, no pretense, only joy. Their bangles caught the lamplight, casting ripples of gold across the fig leaves. Laughter followed, soft and high like wind bells. And yet, even as the music swirled, Lale noticed Mihiri. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, beneath the lattice, a single hand resting on the vine-wrapped archway. She did not eat. She did not speak. But her gaze traveled slowly with careful intent. She was not there for food or music. She was there to see who spoke to whom, who reached for whom, who laughed with whom. In that moment, Lael realized something. Even joy in the harem was layered. Even sweetness was measured. This feast, like all things here, was a stage, if not for performance, then for observation. She lowered her eyes and took a small piece of pomegranate from her dish. She chewed slowly, thoughtfully. Next to her, Harem whispered, "This is our world, little tulip, a garden of quiet eyes." Lael turned toward her. "Why do you come?" Harem looked around, her expression somewhere between melancholy and amusement. "Because sometimes, it's the only place we are not being chosen, not being watched by men or weighed by the Valide, just seen by one another." She looked across the fountain where a girl was telling a story with hand gestures and humming tones, her words replaced by movement. "And because," she added, "even a pomegranate must split to show its worth." The night wore on. The Yao. Stars overhead appeared one by one, mirrored in the polished bowls in the surface of the fountain. Eventually the laughter faded. The dancers sat. The food was slowly cleared, each dish returned as clean as its arrival. No one said goodbye. They simply rose one by one and vanished into the labyrinthine corridors of the harem, like wisps of music fading into memory. Lael walked back alone. She did not rush. She let the cool stone pass beneath her feet, her fingers trailing along the mosaic walls. She had not danced. She had not spoken much, but she had watched. And more importantly, she had been seen, not by everyone, but by enough. In the palace of Topkapi, where every corridor listens and every glance may be a question, it is not often that truth finds voice. Even whispered confessions are rare. Most sentiments are stitched into silk, folded into gestures, or left behind in the quiet curve of a woman's mouth. But there is one place where truth survives, hidden, unsent, and sacred. It is in the letters. Lael discovered them not by chance, but by curiosity shaped into quiet courage. She had been sent to retrieve a spool of thread from the southern wing's storage chambers, rooms rarely visited by the younger concubines. The walls were heavy with old cedar shelves and dust. There, corners curled with cobwebs. Sunlight streamed in through narrow slits in the stone, casting gold-edged shadows. There, nestled in a narrow drawer beneath a pile of unused parchment, she found a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Not locked, not labeled, only carefully tied, as if by someone who wanted them hidden, but not forgotten. She untied the knot with slow fingers. Inside, letters. Dozens, perhaps more. Some written on delicate linen paper, others on scraps torn from packaging or old ledgers, each folded with reverence, pressed with no seal but carefully preserved. She did not mean to read them. At first, she merely touched the edges. She recognized no names, no handwriting. But something in the way they were arranged, intimate, layered, yet unguarded, invited more than silence. So she read. Just one. My sweet little sister. The almond trees must be blooming now. Do they still drop their petals on the roof outside your window? I dream of it often, of you chasing them like butterflies, of mother's voice singing in the kitchen. I cannot say where I am, nor what I do here, but I still laugh sometimes. I still remember your crooked tooth and how you hated milk. I write to remember. I write to stay whole. Tell the trees I miss them. Lael felt the breath catch. In her throat, she read another. To the man I might have married, I imagine you sometimes still at the market, still arguing with that loud melon vendor. I hope your hands are still strong from lifting olives and that your mother still scolds you for forgetting your slippers. I do not dream of escape, only of you remembering I was once there, that once we spoke of stars and goats and futures, and I laughed. She could not stop. Each letter was a life, a thread untied from the great woven illusion of the harem. Each one pulsed with memory, longing, and the strange dignity of unsent words. They were not demands, not hopes, just echoes. Some were poems, some prayers. One was a single sentence. I do not know who I am without mirrors. That night, Lael could not sleep. She stared at the ceiling above her bed, tracing the latticework. With her eyes, the letters repeating in her mind like a soft chant. She realized that for all the watching, all the grooming, all the artistry of the harem's performance, there were corners where women still wrote for no one but themselves. The next day she returned, not to read more, but to write. She brought no fancy parchment, no ink from the royal stores, only a square of cloth, the corner of an old robe, and a piece of charcoal from the warming brazier. She sat on the floor of the storage room, the bundle of old letters beside her, and began to write. To the girl I was when they renamed me. You were scared, I remember. You looked at the marble and wondered if it would be cold forever. You wore a veil that didn't fit and learned a name that didn't feel like yours. I want you to know that you have not disappeared. I remember you, and sometimes when I walk alone, I still hear the echo of your real name. She folded it neatly, then she placed it at the bottom of the bundle beneath all the others. She retied the oilcloth, tucked it back into the drawer, and walked away. Over the following weeks, Lael began to notice small details. The way a girl would pass a piece of scrap linen across her fingers too many times to be idle. The faint smell of ink on a cushion in the quiet hour before dawn. The way Harem once hummed a tune from a distant land she swore she'd forgotten. They all remembered. They all wrote. But none of the letters ever left the palace. And yet, somehow, they traveled. Through hands, through eyes. Through the mere fact of their existence, it became, in its own way, an act of rebellion. A declaration of identity in a place where names could be changed and histories erased. To write, privately, silently, truthfully, was to insist, I am. One night, as Lael was preparing for sleep, she found a scrap tucked under her pillow. Utor, read mine. I read yours. You are not the only one who remembers being renamed. No signature, just a circle drawn in charcoal. She smiled, and for the first time in days, she slept deeply, in the softest corridors of Topkapi, where even sound dares only to glide, the eunuchs walk. They do not stride or stomp. They do not announce. They move like parchment caught in a breeze, present but never imposing. And yet, no door opens without them. No feast is served, no message delivered, no punishment carried out. Their presence is a constant, like the air, taken for granted, until you listen. Lael had long seen the eunuchs as background, silent men in black silk, marked by the strange gentleness of their eyes and the firmness of their discretion. But it was not until a morning thick with mist and the faint scent of stewed quince that she began to understand their true place in the great, invisible machinery of the palace. She had been returning from a delivery of patterned thread to Rumaisa's chamber. The corridors were unusually quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a harp was being tuned. A breeze drifted through a half-open window, ruffling the edge of her sleeve. And then she heard it. A voice, low, calm, measured like a monk's chant. You must never let her see the second letter. Lael stopped just for a moment, one foot still poised in step. The voice belonged to Dervish Aya, one of the chief black eunuchs, a man of indistinct age whose posture was as unchanging as the pillars he passed. He stood with his back to a screen, another eunuch beside him, smaller, younger. The girl from the blue wing? The younger whispered. Yes. Her tongue is too fast and her eyes too sharp. Lael moved on, pretending not to have heard, but the words had already folded themselves into her memory. That evening she watched the eunuchs differently. They were always near, but never too near. Always still, but never truly idle. One refilled a cup at the feast and lingered just long, enough to hear a careless remark. Another led a girl to the mirror room and paused a moment too long at the door. Another handed Rumaisa a package tied in violet silk, bearing no seal. It was not what they did, but how. They observed everything and said nothing. Yet Lael began to realize silence is not absence. It is storage, the eunuchs remembered. And sometimes they whispered. She began to pay attention. A boy no older than 16 who swept the corridors always paused when Harem passed. Once she saw him tuck a folded paper into the hem of her shawl. Another, older, tall, with a small scar near his brow, seemed always to appear after a dispute, just standing, as if the mere act of witnessing was enough to keep tempers tame. Then, there was the Grand Chief Eunuch, Kara Mustafa, whose shadow reached further than anyone imagined. He never rushed. He never raised his voice. Yet when he entered a room, even the most favored concubines stilled their hands and turned their faces. He spoke only rarely, but when he did, it was not instruction, it was adjustment. One evening, Lael watched as he approached a girl who had recently danced before the Sultan. She had begun wearing richer fabrics, louder perfumes. Mustafa said only one thing. Too much light will draw the moths before the Sultan notices the lamp. The girl wore gray for a week after that. One day, as Lele sat in the embroidery chamber, a note appeared beside her thread basket. It was not signed. It read, "Some carry messages in hands. Others carry them in the spaces between footsteps." Below the line was a small sketch, an eye half closed. She knew at once who had placed it there. That evening, she found herself passing the Grand Eunuch's courtyard, not near enough to intrude, but close enough to see him seated alone beneath the fig tree. No guards, No fanfare. She hesitated, then bowed from a distance. He looked at her, not with warning, but with recognition. "You stitch well," he said, voice low and deliberate. Lael nodded. "I try to speak clearly through thread." "Good. But remember?" He paused, eyes narrowing. "Not all messages are meant to be heard. Some are meant to be noticed." Then he turned away, his robe whispering across the stone. That night, Lael lay awake long after the candles had burned down. She thought of the eunuchs, not just as gatekeepers, but as something older, stranger. The keepers of balance. Not rulers, but rulers' memory. Not the voice, but the echo that warns what happens when one speaks too loudly. They had no power and title, no armies, no jewels, but they had presence. And presence in a palace built on performance was the one thing that could not be counterfeited. And now one had spoken to her, not to ask, not to warn, but to notice. In a world of veils, that was more than enough. The letter was not signed, but it was sealed. Pressed into the wax was a tiny almond blossom. No insignia, just the flower itself, etched into the soft white. It came at dawn, slid beneath her chamber door by a eunuch whose face she did not see. The parchment inside was short, written in tight script that looked almost perfumed itself. "Today, before noon prayers, bring no oils. The lesson begins with your own scent." There was no instruction more mysterious or more intimidating within the harem than an invitation to the scent chamber. Lael had only heard rumors, that it was hidden near the eastern side of the harem, tucked behind the oldest pantry. That only a few women were allowed inside at any given time. That the Valide Sultan herself had chosen every ingredient locked within its cabinets. But above all, she had heard that no one left the chamber unchanged. The door to the scent room was unlike any other she'd seen. It was carved from aged walnut, dark and smooth, with veins like spider silk beneath its polish. No knobs, only a single golden hinge, so perfectly fitted that the door swung open without a sound. As Lael stepped inside, the scent met her not like a wave, but like a memory. 1,000 fragrances curled into one, soft, warm, intimate. It was not overpowering. It was complete. The room itself was round, with a domed ceiling painted the color of faded ivory. Shelves lined the walls, each filled with small glass vials, clay jars, and ceramic dishes with lids shaped like petals. In the center sat a single table, wide and low, covered in cloth and surrounded by cushions. Already seated at the far end was a woman in dove-gray robes, her hands folded in her lap, her hair wrapped in silk the color of cinnamon bark. "I am Faride Hanum," she said, not looking up. "Take off your shoes, sit close but not too close." Lael obeyed, folding herself onto a cushion as instructed. Her heart beat steadily, but her fingers betrayed her nervousness, curling and uncurling in her lap. "There are 3 things you must understand about scent," Farid said, unstoppering, a vial and letting it breathe. "First, fragrance is not for others, it is for memory. It marks you, it shapes how others remember having stood near you. Before the mind speaks, the nose remembers." She passed the vial to Lael. "Jasmine," Lael whispered after a slow inhale. Farida nodded. "From the Black Sea coast, picked at dawn. Smell again." Lael obeyed. This time she noticed the sharpness beneath the bloom. A trace of earth. Salt. Something like wet stone. "Do you feel her now?" Farida asked. "Her?" Farida smiled. "The girl who wore it last," Lael blinked. "It smells like sadness." "Yes, that's the salt." She wore it to her final audience with the Sultan. She knew he would not call her again. Lael set the vial down gently. "Second," Farid continued, reaching for a tiny jar sealed with beeswax. "Perfume is not a cover. It is an accent. It must echo the truth, not hide it." From the jar she drew a pinch of powdered clove, letting it fall into a shallow bowl of heated oil. The scent that rose was deep, smoky, almost masculine. Some women wear this to mimic strength, but if they do not feel strong, it betrays them. "What should I wear?" Lael asked, surprised by her own boldness. Farid tilted her head. "That depends. What do you want remembered?" Lael thought. "That I am not afraid to listen." Farid paused. Then she handed her 2 items, a sliver of dried fig and a sprig of rosemary. "Steep these in warm oil. Just a drop. The fig is for softness. The rosemary, memory. Together they will say what you cannot." For the next 2 hours, Lael was taught to blend, not just by combining scents, but by weaving emotion. She learned that sandalwood cooled anger, that rosewater could lie if overused, that amber was best saved for grief, and that orange blossom had to be watched. It was seductive but fickle. Too much, and it clung like desperation. She was shown how to heat oil without burning it, how to crush petals without bruising the essence, how to filter musk through linen until it no longer smelled of anything but yearning. Farid was not kind, but she was never cruel. She corrected with a glance, praised with silence. Lael, under her eye, felt more than instructed. She felt witnessed. Near the end of the lesson, Faridi handed her a small vial. "Your blend," she said. "Not for now. For the day you must be noticed." Lael looked at the clear glass. Inside, the faintest hue of gold shimmered like honey kissed with smoke. "What's in it?" Faride's lips curled. "Nothing you don't already carry." That evening, Lila did not wear perfume. Not even the simple lavender she often dabbed behind her ears. She walked the harem bare of scent, and yet she felt more present than she ever had before. She passed Miri in the corridor. The other girl paused. Her eyes narrowed slightly as if she sensed something. But she said nothing. Later, as Lael folded her prayer mat, a note was slipped beneath her door. "You smell like a story I've forgotten. That's more dangerous than beauty." No name, no sign, just the faint trace of fig. In the harem, light is always managed. It is allowed, not given. Filtered through latticework, softened by silk veils or warmed by lamp oil. But on one night of the year, always the first full moon after the start of the Sultan's spring retreat, the harem glows, not with mirrors, not with jewels, but with lanterns. They are made of rice paper and twine, stitched together by the women weeks in advance. Every concubine, every attendant, even the older ones with fading eyes and trembling fingers. It is said to bring fortune to contribute even a single petal to the lantern's painted sides. No one speaks the name of the occasion aloud. Some call it Geisha Isha, the night of light. Others call it the night of shadows, quietly. For every lantern lifted skyward, there is always a secret kept tightly within. This year, Lael was asked to assist with the final placement, an honor extended to only a few, supervised by no one other than Bashnadim Esma herself. When Lele entered the central courtyard, she felt as if she had stepped into a painted story. Lanterns of every hue, crimson, tangerine, pomegranate, moon-pale gold, swayed on thin strings tied between the garden's fig trees and marble pillars. Each lantern held a single flickering flame within, casting soft halos onto the tiled floors and the concubines moving gently beneath them. The air smelled of sugar, wax, and tulips just past bloom. At the center stood a shallow pool, its surface, glassy, unbroken, reflecting the lanterns above so perfectly that it seemed a second sky. Women wore robes in pastels and pearls. No music played yet. Only the sound of slippers brushing stone, the occasional laugh swallowed by distance and whispers, always whispers. Esma greeted Lael with her usual stillness. "You'll place the blue lanterns over the eastern colonnade." Lael bowed. "Yes, Lady Esma." The blue lanterns were said to represent wisdom, clarity, and restraint. They burned more softly than the others. Their flames filtered through delicate folds painted with clouds, cranes, and water lilies. As she tied the final ribbon, high above the courtyard path, Lael caught sight of someone watching. Not the Sultan, not a favored concubine, but Kara Mustafa, the Grand Eunuch. He was standing at the far edge of the courtyard, between two cypress trees, nearly hidden in the glow. His face, unreadable as always, was fixed on the procession below, but for a moment their eyes met, and he nodded. Once, a single silent approval. Lael felt the ribbon tremble between her fingers. The night unfolded like silk. Once the final lantern was placed, music began. Not the drums and reed flutes used for performance, but something softer, like a lullaby half remembered from childhood. A woman began to sing in Persian, her voice drifting like vapor over the courtyard. Dancers did not perform as they would before the Sultan. This was not for men. This was for one another. The performances were gentler, more sincere. Not to seduce, but to remember. Harem danced that night, her robe the color of apricot blossoms. She moved not with fire, but with something quieter, like rain remembered by stone. Lael watched her and felt, for the first time, something like envy. Not of her beauty, but of her ease. And then came the offering. Every year, a concubine was chosen to release the final lantern, a large floating one, shaped like a lotus, to be set adrift on the pool. It was a symbol of renewal, of grace, of quiet promise. Esma stepped forward. Her voice, low and steady, announced the name, Lael. There was a pause, long enough for Lael to feel it fill her lungs. Then, without a word, she stepped forward. All eyes turned. Not with malice, not yet, but with curiosity, with calculation. She walked to the edge of the pool, her steps slow, her breath folded inward. She took the lantern from Esma's hands. It was warm, its paper edges glowing gold from the candle within. She knelt at the pool's rim and, with both hands, lowered it onto the water. It floated, slowly, gently, like a petal on a breath. And as it drifted, the lantern caught its own reflection, and for a moment, Lael saw herself there too, doubled, split between light and water, a tulip girl, a girl of silence, a girl who, just now, had been chosen. That night, as the lanterns were extinguished one by one and the women filed silently back to their quarters, Lael lingered behind. The courtyard was dim again, the pool still. She bent to pick up the small sliver of wax that had broken free from the lotus lantern. Still warm. As she turned to go, a voice spoke from the dark. You held the light well. It was Mihri. She stood near the lattice arch, her face half lit by the final lantern overhead. I wasn't expecting to, Lily said quietly. No one expects to, until it's too late not to. Their gazes met, not with rivalry, but with something older than competition, recognition. You'll be seen now, Miri added. You'd better decide what they'll remember. And then, as always, she vanished before Lele could answer. The day began like any other. Bread and olives for breakfast, a thin slice of cheese, a brief prayer before the fountain, then back to the embroidery chambers, where Lael was stitching silver reeds onto a robe meant for one of the Sultan's nephews. But when a eunuch with a silk sash of deep violet paused at her cushion and whispered, "Prepare yourself," everything shifted. There was no explanation. There didn't need to be. Everyone in the harem understood what it meant to be summoned on a violet morning. The Sultan would be watching, not meeting, not choosing, merely watching. And yet, it was enough to stir the air in the corridors, to quicken the breath of the calmest woman, and to cause even Miri to press a second drop of perfume behind her ear. These were not private audiences. They were processions, viewings. The concubines would pass one by one or in pairs through a veiled chamber, never fully seeing the Sultan, only glimpsing a silhouette behind a golden curtain, his gaze hidden behind gauze, incense smoke, and silence. But he would see them, not as lovers, as possibilities. Lael had been prepared, of course. Since the night of the lanterns, whispers followed her. Her name spoken more often. Her footsteps shadowed not just by curiosity but by intention. She was no longer invisible. Now, she would become inevitable. The preparation took hours. She was bathed in rose and myrrh, her skin oiled with fig and almond, her hair coiled and pinned with a single sapphire bead, modest yet deliberate. Her robe was deep green, the color of early olive leaves embroidered with cranes in flight. Not ostentatious, not humble, measured. Farid had chosen the perfume, a whisper of rosemary and dried plum. A scent for memory, she'd said, not desire. By the time Lael stood in the waiting chamber, surrounded by other women just as silent, just as adorned, the entire world seemed to breathe in longer intervals. Each inhale a hope, each exhale a prayer not to falter. The chamber itself was small, narrow, and silent. Each woman would walk through alone. A eunuch nodded to Lael. Her turn. She stepped forward. The floor beneath her was mosaic, the pattern A, weaving of tulips and waves. She focused on each step, not too fast, not too slow. The hem of her robe swept the tiles without whispering, and then she was in the chamber. It smelled of oud and fresh ink. The curtain was ahead, thin silk, golden, rippling slightly as if it breathed. Behind it, a figure seated on a raised platform, unmoving, not speaking, just watching. Lael did not bow, not deeply. A shallow incline of her head, respectful but composed. Her hands remained at her sides, her gaze lowered but not submissive. She stood in stillness and waited. She could not see his eyes, only the blur of a face in shadow, the faint outline of a turban, the soft gleam of a ring on one hand. She counted to 10, then 20. Still, he said nothing, but she felt it, that presence, that focus. She did not shift her weight. She did not blink more than once. And then, softly, the curtain rippled. A signal. She bowed again, lower this time, and turned to leave. The walk back through the corridor felt different. Every step away from, the gaze was heavier than the steps toward it. That evening, she said nothing. She sat at the edge of the fountain, dipping her fingers into the cool water. Around her, the harem whispered. Who had he looked at longest? Whose robe had caught the light just so? Who had trembled? But Lael remained silent. Not from fear, from knowing. He had seen her. Not long. Not with fascination. But he had lingered. And in the harem, a moment of stillness meant more than 100 compliments. Later, as she returned to her chamber, she found a package on her cushion. It was small, wrapped in a strip of old silk, tied with embroidery thread the color of dusk. Inside, a single mirror oval framed in brass, the glass slightly smoky, as if it remembered every face it had ever reflected. There was no note, only an engraving at the bottom of the mirror's frame. To see and be seen, each has its price. She turned it in her hand, and for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, what if the Sultan did summon her again? What if she was chosen? And what if she no longer wanted to be? There are places in the harem where time moves differently, corridors where footsteps echo longer, where doors open more slowly, and where women do not rush. These are the corners the young rarely enter, the wings where voices are hushed not out of secrecy, but out of reverence. Or perhaps sorrow. Lael had heard the name before, spoken softly like a lullaby no one wanted to remember. The chamber of the unchosen. It was not a punishment, not an exile, just what happened after. After the Sultan stopped calling, after the attention shifted, after beauty remained but no longer mattered. She was not sent there by command. It came from a moment of stillness, an overheard conversation between two attendants, a broken vase that needed replacing, a bolt of unused fabric, stored in that quiet wing where only the oldest concubines remained. When she arrived, it was nearly noon. The sunlight filtered gently through dust-flecked latticework, casting soft webs on the tiled floor. The hallway curved inward, a slight incline that made her feel as though she were descending, not down in space, but down in memory. The chamber door was open. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of dried rose petals and cedar. No perfume, no song, just stillness. There were 5 women in the room, none younger than 40. Their hair was mostly veiled, their robes simple, though made of the finest silks faded by years and quiet wear. They sat on cushions facing one another, embroidering. Not urgently, not beautifully, just continuing. Lael hesitated. One of the women looked up. Her eyes were gray, rimmed with fine lines, but her posture remained straight, regal. "You're not supposed to be here," she said softly. Not with hostility, just with certainty. "I was sent for fabric," Lael replied. "I didn't know." Another woman chuckled. "No one ever does, until they do." There was no bitterness in her voice. Only a weary elegance. The woman with gray eyes nodded toward a basket by the far wall. "The fabric is there. But since you've come all this way, sit, rest your feet." Lael obeyed. She sat at the edge of the cushion, unsure of whether to speak. The women continued their embroidery, not looking at her yet not ignoring her. Their silence was not exclusion. It was familiarity with their own rhythm, one that Lael could not yet join, but might someday. After a long pause, the eldest, among them a woman with hands like lace, spoke without lifting her head. "Do you know what this place is?" Lael nodded faintly. "They call it the Chamber of the Unchosen." The woman smiled. "That's what the younger ones call it. We call it the Echo Room." Lael tilted her head. "Because everything here is echo," the woman continued. "An echo of laughter, of perfume, of footsteps in heels we haven't worn in years. We echo each other, and sometimes we echo ourselves." Another woman spoke, her voice airy. "We weren't discarded. We were set aside, like pearls that didn't match the necklace." They laughed softly, not sadly, just gently. Lael looked around. The chamber was simple. One corner held a shelf with old poetry scrolls, a few small oil lamps. Another held mirrors covered in cloth. "Do you still see him?" Lael asked, before she could stop herself. The room went still. Then, after a moment, the woman with gray eyes answered, "Not as he is. Only as he was when he last looked at me." Another nodded. "That's how memory works here. You don't carry the man, you carry his gaze." Lael looked down at her hands. They were still smooth. Still young, for now. The oldest woman placed her embroidery hoop in her lap. Her eyes, still sharp, studied Lael. "You were seen recently," she said. "The scent of fig and rosemary, a brave blend." Lael blinked. "I remember wearing orange. Blossom," the woman added. "It made me bold, until boldness stopped being wanted." They weren't warning her. They weren't jealous. They were reminding her that beauty fades differently in places where it was once currency. That silence isn't always forced. Sometimes it's a choice you grow into. That this chamber, this peaceful room of still grace, was not a prison. It was simply a conclusion. Lael rose slowly, thanking them with a bow deeper than formality. As she picked up the bolt of fabric, the gray-eyed woman called after her, "Lael." She turned. "When the gaze falls on you again, ask yourself, are you being remembered or being replaced?" Lael said nothing, but the words followed her all the way back to her chamber. That night she didn't perfume herself. She didn't sit by the fountain or read beneath the lantern. She lit a single lamp, stared into the brass-framed mirror she'd been gifted, and whispered, "Would I rather be unseen forever, or remembered only for a moment I didn't choose?" And though the mirror gave no answer, her own reflection blinked. Once, as if it too wasn't quite sure. There are afternoons in the harem when time stretches like warm honey. After the heat of midday prayer has settled, and before the golden hush of dusk begins its descent, the women gather, not to work, not to serve, but to pass time. Yet in the harem, even time passing carries consequence. On this particular afternoon, Lael was invited to the Rose Room. It was not a formal space. Rather, it was one of those peculiar corners of the palace that belonged solely to the women, a room without mirrors, its walls painted with faded vines and old birds in flight. Cushions lined the walls, and in the center lay a silver tray holding a bundle of embroidered cloth. When Lael entered, Harem greeted her with a smirk. "You're just in time. We're playing." "Playing what?" Lael asked, lowering herself onto a cushion beside her. Harem lifted a length of silk to reveal what was underneath. 8 small spoons, each one carved from silver, their handles bent slightly and each bearing a tiny colored stone. Ruby red, sapphire blue, topaz yellow, emerald green. "The game of spoons," Harem said, her voice lowered with drama. "Also called whispers and wagers." Around the circle, other women giggled. Rukia was there, silent as always, her spoon already chosen and tucked into her sash. 2 twins from Albania, both with hair like dark honey, sat at opposite ends, mirroring one another's posture. Miri was not there, but Lael felt her absence like a shadow on the cushion. Harem held up a spoon with an amber-colored gem. "The rules are simple. Each of us chooses a spoon. The color you choose aligns you with a question. You must answer honestly, silently." "How does one answer silently?" Lael asked. "You'll see," Harem replied, passing the tray to her. Lael looked down. The spoons gleamed like tiny swords. She chose the one with a lapis blue stone. The moment she did, everyone looked at her. Rukia spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, clear. "Blue asks, what do you long for that no one knows?" Lael blinked. No one told her to speak. No. One asked her to explain, they just waited. She felt her face flush. What did she long for? Safety? Choice? To go back? To go forward? Instead, she did what the others had done. She took the spoon, held it to her lips, and then placed it, bowl down, on the tray. Silent answer. The others nodded. Next was Harem. She held a spoon with a red stone. Red asks, "Who do you envy?" She laughed. "Too dangerous." But still she followed the ritual. A kiss to the spoon. Then it joined the tray. One by one they continued. Green asked what betrayal you would forgive. Yellow asked what dream you no longer dared to name. And as each woman answered without a word, the room filled with something deeper than chatter, deeper than gossip, truth, not spoken, just offered. When the tray returned to Lael, there were only 2 spoons left. One was black, the stone obsidian. The other was clear, crystal. She reached for the black spoon. Gasps, not loud, but audible. Harem's face softened, almost sad. Black asks, she said quietly, "What will you sacrifice to be remembered?" Lael held the spoon. It was heavier than she expected. She thought of the mirror room, of the chamber of the unchosen, of Miri's quiet gaze, of Faride's blend of fig and rosemary, of the Sultan's silhouette behind the veil, and then of her name, her true name, the one she no longer used. The one no one here had ever spoken. She kissed the spoon and placed it down. The tray was still. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Rukia reached for the clear spoon. "Crystal," she whispered, asks, "What is the truth about you that even you cannot face?" She did not hesitate, kissed, placed, done. No laughter followed. No teasing. Instead, the women leaned back into the cushions, the afternoon light slipping through the lattice and landing on the silver tray like a silent judge. They stayed like that for a while, each woman folded into her own thoughts. No need for more. until Harem broke the silence. "There's a reason we don't play this game often." "Why?" Lael asked. "Because it leaves something behind," Harem said. "A piece of you, on that tray." She lifted the cloth again, covering the spoons, and once it's there, it never really leaves. That night, Lael dreamed of spoons. Not silver now, but mirrors. Each one reflecting a version of herself she didn't quite recognize. In one, she wore the robe of a favorite. In another, she sat beside Rumesa, old, still sewing. In another still, she stood alone in the courtyard, no lanterns lit, and in each reflection she held something small in her hands. A spoon or a secret? She couldn't be sure. In top copy, some messages arrive not in letters or gestures, but in footsteps, measured, unhurried, always one beat ahead of your breath. Lael heard them before she saw him. She had been standing alone by the outer fountain, an old place near the laundry gardens, where steam from nearby chambers blurred the air and birds nested in the carved arches above. The stone beneath her feet was warm, but the air was cool, fragrant with crushed mint and wet linen. She had come here to think. The game of spoons still clung to her. The weight of that black-handled question lingered, quiet and unfinished. Then came the sound. Soft-soled slippers, deliberate, not tentative, not in a rush, but not aimless. She turned. It was not Kara Mustafa, the Grand Eunuch, nor one of the young runners with swift feet and curious eyes. It was the one they called Bekir. Bekir. He was older than most, perhaps 70, perhaps more. His back curved slightly, but his stride remained straight. His robes were darker than usual today, ink-colored, not black, and he wore no ring, no sash, no emblem to speak of rank, only his presence. Lael bowed, slightly. He did not answer immediately, only looked at her with eyes the color of old bronze, sharp, but not cruel. "You're standing in the place the doves prefer," he said finally, gesturing toward the ledge. Lael stepped aside instinctively. "You're not the first to do so," he added. "But the first to apologize without being asked." Lael didn't know what to say. She stayed silent. Bekir sat on the edge of the fountain, slow but without struggle. He looked at the water for a long time. "The last girl who stood there," he said, "was chosen within a month. She sang once for the Sultan. After that, she stopped speaking entirely. Now she embroiders garden gates into every piece of cloth they give her. No one knows why." Lael felt her throat tighten. Bekir looked at her then, directly. "You've been noticed. That much is clear." He said it without praise, without warning. A fact laid between them. "Yes," Lael replied quietly. "You think the danger is in being forgotten," he said. "But it isn't." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice without lowering its weight. "The danger," he said, "is in being remembered too clearly, by too many." Lael's brows drew together. Bekir continued, "The Sultan is not the only man with eyes, nor is the Valide the only woman who protects her throne. In the palace, you will find attention offered like sweets. Too much sugar can ruin the tongue, or worse, make others hungry." The metaphor unfolded like silk, soft, precise, sharp. Lael nodded slowly. "What do I do?" Bekir smiled. Just a little, and only with his eyes. "You continue exactly as you are, but remember, there are ears even in the silence." He rose, then, slow and sure, and added, "and eyes in the steam." He began to walk away, but paused. "One more thing," he said without turning. "Do not trust the woman who speaks with one voice in the mirror and another behind the lattice, and..." Then he was gone. The rest of the day passed like water under ice, still on the surface but with quiet tremors underneath. Lael returned to her chamber, lit no lamps, and sat beside the wall. She thought of Miri, of Harem, of Rumesa, of Esma, of the note tucked once beneath her pillow, unsigned. "You smell like a story I've forgotten." She thought of the spoon she kissed. What will you sacrifice to be remembered? And now, Bakir's warning. Too many eyes, too much sugar, too many voices from the wrong mouths. That evening, she was summoned to bring a small embroidered shawl to the Valid's chamber. Routine. Normal. But when she arrived, the room was emptier than usual. The Valid was alone, seated by a brazier sipping pomegranate tea. Lael bowed, placed the shawl on the velvet tray, and prepared to retreat. "Stay," said the Valid. "She did. Do you know?" the old woman mused. "What makes a flame beautiful?" Lael hesitated. "The light it casts," the Valida nodded. "And its warmth." She sipped again. "But too much flame," she continued. "And the fabric scorches. And no one remembers what color it once was." Lael kept her eyes lowered. "You're being watched, Lael. And not just by the ones who care." Lael said nothing. She didn't need to. That night she found a new spoon on her pillow. This one was made of wood, carved with simple lines. No stone, no shine, only a single phrase etched into the handle. "Choose carefully when you're not being asked to choose." She tucked it away beneath her cushion and blew out the candle. There were corners of Topkapi even silence forgot. Corridors left unlit except for the spill of sun through domes far above. Steps that no longer echoed. Doors that creaked only when the wind grew curious. Lael had discovered one such corridor, the morning after Bakir's warning, while delivering a bundle of silk scraps to the dye chamber. But instead of turning right, as she always did, her feet drifted left. Not out of confusion, but out of instinct. The hallway narrowed, bending slightly, as if unsure of where it was going. The tiles lost their polish, but not their beauty. Faded reds and deep greens still telling stories even as their outlines blurred. The air was cooler here, touched with musk and something like jasmine long gone. She expected it to end in a storage alcove. Instead, it opened into a small domed chamber, octagonal, quiet and full of sound. Not sound as most would know it. There were no words, no instruments visible, but a melody moved through the air like silk under warm water. Not hummed, not played, but released. And at the center, seated on a worn cushion beside a low brazier, was a woman. Her hair was wrapped, in blue linen. Her eyes were pale and unfocused, unseeing. Her hands rested on her knees, open and relaxed. Her lips did not move. And yet, Lael heard the song. It curled through the chamber, touching the old walls, teasing the flame, brushing. Lael's skin like a feather from some long-forgotten bird. It had no rhythm she could count, no structure she could follow, and yet it felt complete. The woman tilted her head slightly. "You breathe loudly," she said. Lael startled. I'm sorry, I didn't know." "You're not supposed to," the woman replied calmly. "Most don't come here, but you stayed, so sit." There was no command in her voice, only invitation. Lael obeyed, lowering herself to the floor across from her. The air here seemed slower, heavier but not unpleasantly so, as if the room asked for your full presence. The woman smiled. "I am Aiden," she said. "I keep the songs no one writes down." Lael hesitated. "Are you a musician? Are you a—" Aiden shrugged gently. "Once. Then I went blind, now I just remember." They sat in silence. The song had not ended. It never began, really. It was just there, like heat, like the scent of wood smoke in a scarf long put away. "You didn't—" "Speak the tune," Lael said. "No need," Aiden replied. "The heart sings loudest when the mouth is quiet." Lael let that settle. After a long moment, she asked, "How do you remember the music?" Aiden smiled slowly. "I don't. I feel it, in my ribs, in the ground, in the change in someone's breath when they think of home." She turned slightly toward Lael. "Yours changed when you walked in." Lael swallowed. "It did?" "Yes. You brought something with you. Regret, perhaps. Or, wait." Lael didn't answer. She didn't need to. The song seemed to shift, softening further, turning almost cool, a note she didn't understand but felt, like the difference between a breeze and a sigh. "Do you sing for the Sultan?" Lael asked. Aiden laughed softly. "I used to, when I had words." Now it was Lael's turn to tilt her head. "You lost them?" "No. I gave them up. Words can lie. But this," she gestured to the air, "this never lies." Lael closed her eyes and listened, not just to the sound, but to the space between sounds, to the breath of the flame, to her own heartbeat, to the echo of something that was not memory, not quite hope, but a strange and delicate longing for something unnamed. When she opened her eyes, Aiden was watching, not with sight, but with presence. "You're not lost," the blind woman said. "But you are tired." Lael nodded. "I don't know what I want." "That's good," Aiden said, smiling. "The ones who know what they want too soon become loud, and loud things break first." They sat in silence again. This time, Lael let her body relax. She let her thoughts untangle, allowed her gaze to drift across the dome above, painted long ago with faded constellations no one followed anymore. She stayed for nearly an hour. No words exchanged, no lessons given, only presence, only song. Before she left, Aiden reached beside her and pulled out a small satchel. She handed it to Lael. Inside was a stone, smooth, warm, the color of sunlit honey. No inscription, no scent, just calm. "Keep it in your sleeve," Aiden said. "When the palace grows too loud, hold it, let it hum for you." Lael clutched it gently. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Aiden smiled. "I won't see you at all, but you'll come back if you need to." That night, Lael placed the stone beside her pillow. She did not light a candle. She did not pray. She listened, and in the stillness she heard the faintest echo, not a song but herself, unspoken, unhurried, still there. The embroidery chambers were quieter than usual that morning. Sunlight fell in long, narrow strips across the tiled floor, gilding the edges of cushions and turning dust into drifting gold. Most of the women had been sent out on errands, deliveries, to the Valide's seamstress, arrangements for an upcoming tea ritual with visiting dignitaries' wives, and whispers of another viewing session in the Sultan's court. Lael remained. She had been tasked with reviewing a final set of ceremonial sashes destined for the Sultan's personal guards, a privilege according to Rumisa, a test according to herself. Each sash was wrapped in muslin, labeled by the name of the embroiderer. Some were bright, turquoise and gold, symbols of strength and service. Others were darker, dyed in rust, and indigo, meant to reflect a warrior's solemnity. The designs were as expected: tulips, swords, swirling stars, until she came upon the 9th sash. At first glance, it was beautiful. A pale gray background, delicate vines in silver thread with a single repeating motif, small blossoms shaped like narcissus blooms, but not the usual 6 petals. These had 7, subtle, intentional. Lael leaned closer. Among the blossoms, one seemed slightly off, its placement uneven, as though the vine bent too sharply toward it. She turned the fabric over. There, almost hidden within the folds, was a second layer of stitching, crude compared to the rest, in darker thread, not meant to be seen unless inspected. A single word, not in Turkish nor Arabic, in Persian: "Beware." Her breath caught in her chest. She blinked, rubbed her thumb over it, but the thread remained. Not part of the official design, not decorative, a message buried beneath beauty. She checked the label. It bore a familiar name, one of the quiet seamstresses from the outer quarters, a woman Lael had seen only once or twice, always alone, always focused. She considered calling Rumesa, but something held her back. Not fear, instinct. Instead, she folded the sash carefully, returned it to its wrapping, and placed it aside. Then she unwrapped the next one, pretending to study it, though her thoughts buzzed louder than any spindle. Who was the warning for? Why hide it beneath a ceremonial sash? And more importantly, how many other petals in the harem were blooming with secrets? That evening, Lael waited until most had gone to prayer. She returned to the embroidery shelves, unwrapped the sash again, and studied it by lamplight. 7-petal narcissus. The number 7, she remembered, held significance across cultures. Completion, judgment, warning. But here, it felt pointed. She traced the dark thread with the back of a needle. It didn't fray. Whoever stitched it knew how to hide it well. But not from her. That fact alone made her shiver. The next day, she asked casually about the seamstress who made the sash. Her name's Nazla, said Harem. Came from the northern provinces, keeps to herself. Does good work. Too good, maybe. But no one favors her. She doesn't smile. Does she speak Persian? Harem shrugged. Everyone speaks a little of something. That night, beneath her pillow, Lael found another spoon. Wooden, but this one bore no carving, only a thread, wrapped once around the handle. Silver, identical to the one used in the Narcissus sash. It wasn't a warning, it was a reply. Someone knew she had seen, and now she had been noticed in return. She considered speaking to the Valide. But there were risks. What if this was not meant for the Sultan? What if it was a message passed between concubines? Or worse, between those inside and those outside? She could become a knot in someone else's fabric. Instead, she returned to Rumesa, her expression neutral, her voice steady. The 9th sash, she said. The blossom pattern is inconsistent. Rumesa looked up. Her fingers paused. In what way? 7 petals, not 6. The vine shifts unnaturally to accommodate it. A long silence. Then Rumesa nodded. Set it aside. We'll say the color. Bled. Not fit for ceremony. Nothing more was said. But that night, Lael found a new pattern waiting for her to study. Simple, flawless, uncoded. But in the margin of the pattern, someone had inked a tiny blossom. 6 petals. And one small drop of ink in the center. As if to say, we are watching the ones who sow warnings, and also we are watching you. It was just after rain. The palace always grew softer after a rain. Its stones still warm from the day, now cooled, slick, and echoing like a cavern of marble dreams. The scent of the earth would rise up to meet the corridors, mingling with rose water, wet fig leaves, and the faint musk of old linen. But that night something else rode the air. Lael noticed it first by accident. She had gone to retrieve a small bundle of cotton from the storage chamber behind the water hall. The room was quiet, lit only by the low flame of a brass lantern swaying gently from the ceiling. She stepped inside and stopped. A scent lingered there, not strong, but unmistakably wrong. It was not rose, not amber, not lavender or sandalwood or any of the authorized oils that perfumed the breath of every woman in the harem. It was bitter, like smoke laced with crushed pine and something older, earthy, foreign. It had edges. It did not bloom. It pressed. Lael remained still, her body alert without panic. The scent was not entirely unpleasant. In fact, it stirred something unplaceable in her, a memory she did not own. As if she'd once stood beside someone who wore it, or dreamed of someone who did. But that wasn't possible. No one in the harem used such a blend. It wasn't allowed. Only the Valide Sultan, and a select few under her command, approved which perfumes could be worn inside the palace. Everything else was forbidden, controlled, regulated, and yet this scent hung in the air like a secret no one meant to share. She stepped deeper into the room. The cotton bundles sat untouched. The ledgers remained closed. Nothing was missing. Nothing disturbed. Yet the scent was strongest near the door, almost as if whoever carried it had only paused there. She touched the wood, still damp from the rain. A fingerprint, maybe? No, Nothing. But she knew. Someone had stood there. Someone who didn't belong. She said nothing that night. Not to Rumesa. Not to Harem. Not even in her prayers. She lay in bed with her eyes open, the scent still lodged in her lungs. What was it? Where? Had it come from? Who had carried it? And why had she been the one to notice? She recalled Faridi's lesson. Fragrance is not for others. It is for memory. It marks you. Then whose memory was this? 2 days passed. The scent did not return. But on the third evening, Lael passed a eunuch in the courtyard, one she did not recognize. He was tall, older than most, with robes just slightly off, the stitching not quite the palace pattern, the belt too narrow. He did not look at her, but as he passed, the scent brushed past her shoulder again. Her heart stilled, not identical, but similar, faint, fading. She turned, but he had already turned the corner. She followed, silently. He moved quickly, but did not rush, as if he had walked these halls before but not recently. His steps were too light, too familiar to be new, too unfamiliar to belong. He disappeared into the northern annex, a wing sealed for repairs, or so they said. Lael stood at the arch, uncertain whether to proceed, and then she saw the ribbon, tied loosely to a vine creeping through the lattice, a strip of muslin dyed in pale yellow, marked with a pattern she recognized. A fig leaf, drawn backwards, a symbol once used by the concubines of the previous sultan, no longer in use, forbidden. Her breath caught. This was not an accident. Someone had returned, someone from before, or someone who remembered too well. She brought the muslin to her chamber, wrapped in another cloth. She studied it by candlelight, then again in the sun the next morning. The thread was older, slightly frayed, but not damaged. Whoever left it wanted it seen. By her. She tucked it away beneath her mattress, and that night she dreamt of a garden with no gates, a woman standing beside her, wearing nothing but scent, and smiling without eyes. In the morning, Farid found her before she left her chamber. She said nothing at first, only placed a small glass vial in Lael's hand. "Something for the days when you feel too much," she said. Lael opened it. The scent inside was gentle, musk, fig, and ashwood, but beneath it, something familiar. "Where did you find this blend?" Lael whispered. Farida's expression didn't change, but her answer was slow. "From someone who used to know how to disappear." Lael looked at her and understood. Not every memory fades. Some return with a scent, and some were never meant to leave. There are rooms in the palace where footsteps disappear. They don't echo. They don't creak. They vanish into thick carpets, into quiet tapestries, into walls so draped in velvet they seem to drink every sound. These are not the halls of laughter or labor. They are the chambers of favor. And now, Lael was being led to one of them. The eunuch who summoned her spoke only once. The favor wing. No other words were needed. It was a place whispered about more than visited, a series of private suites where the sultan's most trusted, most desired, or most politically useful concubines resided. Some stayed there only weeks, others for years. A few never left. As they walked, Lael noticed the change in air. Cooler, fragrant not with the usual rose water or sandalwood, but something deeper. Resin, perhaps, a trace of rare tobacco, the scent of wealth sealed behind heavy doors. The entrance was guarded not with spears but with silence. 2 eunuchs in indigo robes nodded, then opened the doors in perfect sync. Inside, Lael stepped onto a floor so thick with silk carpeting she could no longer feel the stone beneath. The walls shimmered with golden threads woven into depictions of gardens and stars. Lamps hung low, their light softened through amber glass. And then came the women. Not many. perhaps 5 or 6. They were seated apart, each on her own platform, draped in rich fabrics, surrounded by bowls of fruit, crystal, flasks of sherbet, and small dishes of candied violets. None of them spoke when Lael entered, but all of them watched. Their beauty was not theatrical. It was composed. These were not girls hoping to be seen. They were women who had been. And now, they waited. A servant gestured for Lael to approach the central dais where a woman reclined beneath a canopy of dark green silk. Her robe was simple, but her belt shimmered with pearls. Her eyes were outlined in kohl so delicately that it seemed they had been painted, not painted over. "Lael," she said, her voice light but unwavering. "The Valid has allowed you to visit. Once." Lael bowed. "Thank you." The woman studied her, not unkindly, not warmly either. "You've never been here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No." "You've wondered what it's like?" Lael hesitated. "Yes." The woman gestured around. "It's quieter than you imagine, quieter than even the embroidery rooms." Another woman nearby chuckled softly. "Silence is the sound of survival, dear." They weren't mocking her. They were preparing her. The first woman, her name, Lael would later learn was Gulnaz, gestured for her to sit, not on the platform, on the floor beside it. "You think this is the summit," she said, sipping sherbet. "The place every girl in the harem hopes to reach. Favor, riches, a name, whispered by the Sultan, a future." She leaned forward. "But the truth is, this is a waiting room." "For what?" Lael asked. "For forgetting," Gulnaz replied. "The moment the Sultan favors another, we fade, not into disgrace, into decoration." Another woman nearby nodded. "We become perfume bottles on a high shelf, polished, admired, unused." Lael looked around. Now that she knew what to see, she noticed the details. The fruit bowls barely touched. The books left open but unread. The mirrors turned just slightly inward, so no one looked too closely. "This place is called..." "A wing," said another, "but it has no windows." They spoke not with resentment, but with clarity, a soft, resigned wisdom. "And yet," Gulnaz added, "none of us would leave if offered." Lael looked at her, confused. "Because once you've been lit by the Sultan's gaze," she said, "you fear the dark more than the cage." That stayed with her, long after she left the chamber, long after the eunuchs closed the doors behind her, long into the night, as she lay in bed with her fingers pressed to the smooth wood of her spoon. Not the decorated one, the plain one, no stone, no carving, just weight. The next morning, she didn't go to the embroidery room. She didn't go to the baths. She returned to Aiden, the blind musician. She sat down in silence and listened. The song that drifted through the air was different now, still wordless, still soft. But Lael finally heard what lay beneath it. The cage, the velvet, the breath between beauty and captivity, and the hush of a woman learning which was which. In the harem, your name is never truly yours. It begins when they strip the dust from your shoes, the village from your hair, the language from your mouth. They do not mean it cruelly. They mean it cleanly. The past is to be folded, pressed, and locked away like last season's robes. You arrive one person, you are renamed another, and you learn to smile when your new name is called, even if your ribs tighten just slightly, as though the sound never quite fits. Lael had answered to that name for so long that even she had forgotten when it became hers. But tonight, something inside refused to answer. The chamber was warm with the scent of orange blossom and the quiet scratch of quill against parchment. She was copying patterns for a cushion the Valid had requested. Nothing ornate, just a repeat of stylized pomegranate blossoms. Her fingers moved, but her mind did not. Earlier that day, she had passed a window that overlooked the Bosphorus. The water had shimmered silver blue, the wind carrying the distant cry of gulls. Something about it struck her. Not beauty, not longing, recognition. The scent of salt and olive trees. The way light touched stone differently outside these walls. A part of her stirred, a part that did not belong to velvet or mirrors. And in that moment, without meaning to, her real name echoed in her mind. Not Lael. Not the name chosen for its softness, its simplicity, its suitability. Her name. The one spoken by her mother in lullabies, once sung beside a cold stream at dusk. The one whispered by her grandmother when brushing her hair and tying braids with red thread. The name carved into the underside of a wooden spoon her father once whittled for her on a feast day. It startled her. She almost dropped her ink. She hadn't heard that name inside her mind for years. And now it would not leave. That night, she walked to the mirror room. She did not light a lamp. She walked by memory, her fingers grazing the wall, her breath slow and even. The mirrors inside welcomed her with moonlight. No reflection harsh, no line sharp. She stood before the largest mirror, unadorned, hair loose, and said it aloud. Her name, just once. It did not echo, but it resonated. She saw her face. Not the girl who had entered the harem, not the woman who now walked carefully through its games, but something in between, or perhaps something beyond. For the first time in seasons, her face matched the name. She said it again, and the corners of her mouth lifted, not in performance, in peace. She sat on the cold floor, cross-legged, and closed her eyes. In dreams, she saw a fig tree, its roots deep, its branches scarred. Someone, a woman, stood beside it, tying something red around the bark. The woman turned. She had Lael's eyes, but not her name. She smiled and vanished. The next morning, Lael awoke with a certainty she had not known since childhood. She found a scrap of fabric, linen, not silk, and began to stitch. Not flowers, not script, just one thing. The first letter of her real name. She stitched it inside the hem of her own robe, where no one would see it, where no one needed to. She wasn't reclaiming power, she was reclaiming self. Later that day, while sorting spools in the embroidery chamber, Rumesa approached. She didn't speak at first, just offered a folded cloth. For the valide, she said. Lael opened it. It was a robe. Simple, beautifully cut. Inside the collar, someone had embroidered a single initial. Not Ottoman, not Arabic. Her initial. Lael looked up. Rumesa smiled, but only with her eyes. I thought you might want a name. No one else could touch, she said. Lael said nothing, but her heart swelled so gently she feared it might spill from her throat. That evening, she returned to the musician. Aiden was humming. No words, just notes that curved like smoke. Lael sat without speaking. They remained there, breathing in sync. I remembered something, Lael said after a long while. I know, Aiden replied. Your rhythm changed. Silence again. Then softly, Lael whispered her name. Aiden nodded, eyes still closed. Beautiful, she said. It fits your silence. That night, Lael did not perfume herself. She did not polish her mirror. She tucked the stitched robe beneath her pillow and whispered her name one last time before sleep. It was not loud, but it was hers, and that, at last, was enough. On the morning the curtains stopped moving, no one noticed but her. The sun entered the harem as it always did, angled, golden, soft. The latticework cast pale patterns across the marble floor, and a breeze from the Bosphorus flirted with the garden's edge. The birds sang in the citrus trees. The women passed one another with practiced grace. But something, Lael knew, was no longer shifting. She sat beside the small central fountain. It had always been her place of pause, not for ritual, not for waiting, just for breath. She watched the velvet curtains hanging in the corridor ahead. Usually they swayed, slightly, subtly, with the passing of footsteps or the pull of warm air through the domes above. Today, they were still. They hung motionless, heavy, watching or sleeping. She could not tell which. But in her, something woke. Had been days, weeks perhaps, since she'd spoken her real name aloud. Since she'd stitched the first letter of it into the hem of her robe. Since she'd hidden the wooden spoon beneath her pillow. Since she'd sat with Aiden and heard her rhythm change. Since she'd stopped needing to be seen. The awareness grew quietly, like a bruise beneath silk. Not painful, just certain. She was done waiting, not because a door had opened, but because a door no longer mattered. In her chamber, the morning light cast a soft glow across her belongings. Sparse, by design. She had kept very little, never attached herself to objects the way some girls did, but she had gathered tokens over time, like a slow snowfall of memory. The spoon from Farid, tulip-carved and worn smooth at the tip. The linen square bearing the stitched letter of her true name. The ribbon, fig-leaf marked, from the sealed corridor. The smooth amber stone from Aiden's hand. She laid them all out in a line across her low table. Then gently, she folded each item into a cotton wrap. Nothing ceremonial. No binding cords or parting tears, just care. She placed the bundle inside the wooden box she had kept hidden since her first winter in the palace. Then she tucked the box not beneath the bed, but in the open, in view. Not to flaunt, but to stop hiding. She reached for the robe she had worn upon arrival years ago. A plain ivory garment, rougher now, too short at the wrists. She slipped it on. No jewelry, no sash. She left her hair uncovered. She looked into the mirror. She did not smile. She did not need to. The girl looking back was not dressed for favor. She was dressed for beginning. She walked without haste through the embroidery chamber where Rumesa glanced up but said nothing. Her eyes widened just a little and then softened. She nodded once. Through the outer corridors, where a concubine hummed under her breath, stitching an almond blossom onto a scarf. Through the spice room, where Farid was boiling rose water, and paused only long enough to offer her a dried fig with a knowing glance. Through the music alcove, where Aiden sat cross-legged, a new song rising from her chest. Lael slowed, placed a hand on the threshold. Aiden turned her head, smiled faintly. "You're not vanishing," she said. "You're unfolding." Lael said nothing, but her silence was agreement. She continued walking. At the edge of the harem, near the service corridor that led to the palace's outer wing, she stopped. There was no gate. There was no need. She had, not asked for permission, and no one had offered, but she stepped forward anyway. Not out, just forward. And in doing so, past a threshold more real than any doorway. She wasn't escaping. She wasn't defecting. She was declaring that she existed before this, and would exist after, even if she remained within these walls, even if no one outside ever knew her name, even if the Sultan never spoke to her again. She had become something unmarked, not forgotten, but unclaimed. And in that, there was peace. She returned to her chamber before dusk. She did not weep. She did not speak. She lit a single lamp and opened her window just slightly, letting the evening air carry the scent of fig leaves and iron. The curtains did not stir, but she did not need them to, because now she was not waiting for the breeze. She was the breeze.